In October of 2016, hunter Sean Higgins entered the woods with his son on a routine hunting trip. But Sean never came out of those woods. He was never seen again. This is just one of the risks you take when entering the forest, let alone hunting for hours. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best channel to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. I went hunting with my father many times when I was young, but usually I just ended up falling asleep. But ask any experienced hunter, and you'll probably hear about some of the strangest and creepiest things they've seen while hunting. Enjoy the following allegedly true hunting scary stories. If you want your story in a future video, I'm looking for creepy stories from Chick-fil-A. If you've got one, send it to me at darknessprevails.org/submit. And check out my app, Spooked. It's free and has all my videos and thousands of stories in one place. If you have time, leave me a review too. Now, no amount of camouflage will hide you from the real monsters in the woods. Number 1. The Forest Behind My House, submitted by Norman. I haven't shared this story with anyone because I don't like to relive the memory, or more accurately, memories. I should clarify that I live on a 28-acre property in the northern US, and behind the home that borders the road, there is a fairly large forest that stretches significantly to the south and west until it reaches I-75 on the western side. I don't exactly know which of the several events I've experienced would be considered the most or least horrifying per se, but I'll try to order them chronologically. Because, in my opinion, they've developed into progressively more horrifying encounters the older I am, and the more persistent my memory is. So forgive me if the arrangement is more of a bounce than a progression. I'll start with the time I was 5 years old. Throughout childhood, my grandfather would always remain soundly in holiday spirit. On each Halloween, he would put up old pillowcases with cloth hanging from trees to creepily decorate the edge of the forest I lived next to. On Christmas, he would strictly enforce the English tradition of telling ghost stories, and in the summer, he would eagerly anticipate the arrival of Independence Day, solely to set off some M80 firecrackers, the big ones, at midnight. Although the dogs didn't like this, nor our sleeping neighbors, I always found contentness in his will to have a good time. This is besides the point. Let me get back to that point. Those fake ghosts he would hang from trees, the cloth and pillowcase entities that were about 3 to 4 feet long, were where this started for me. Until I was 5, he did this every year, even before I was born, from what I've learned from my mother. On Halloween of 2005, after returning from school, as I was being driven towards our house, I saw the human effigies he hung, and I was excited that another year of tradition was condoned. Upon closer inspection, I noticed one of the ghosts had red spots on its left torso, with a little bit of staining on the right shoulder. I asked my grandfather, "What did you use to make that blood that's on them?" He looked at me kind of silly as he opened the truck door. When I got out, he responded in a voice you'd use to treat a child babbling nonsense. "I didn't put anything on them." At the angle the truck was now at, where we had driven up the lane, our house was now obstructing the view of the forest, so I asked him to walk around the home with me to see what I was talking about. I know what I saw, and I was absolutely positive it was a red shade. When we got to the other side of the house, around a spot where today a magnolia tree stands, I pointed at the effigies, but before I could mutter my brag of being right, I was horrified to see that there was no such effigy with blood on it, and even more chilling, there was one less effigy than there was before. Because originally, there had been 3 hung, always 3. It was a simplicity thing. When I saw the blood-tainted effigy earlier, there were 4. I thought nothing of this, but now it had become ironic that I paid no attention because of how bizarre and creepy it was. Because as an adult, as I look back on it, I know what I saw appeared to be a hanging child, which is a thought I do not fancy entertaining at all. It was so disturbing. Every time I recount my original view of the 4 effigies, I think about how real the bloodied one looked. Every now and then I have nightmares of it lifting its head and seeing myself with a noose around my neck. Anyway, I'll tell the second encounter I had with the forest, which occurred when I was 9. This one is slightly less clear, but more memorable. Every August, my grandfather would take me deer spotting in the forest. This was to get an idea if it was worth hunting back there each season, or if it was too much trouble. On this particular day, we were about 200 meters into the forest, lying atop a log, concealed by a small hill. We had been there for at least 4 hours now, just sitting. As a 9-year-old child, I was definitely tired. I went to sleep, and to my terror, I had one of the recurring dreams I described earlier, of the boy hanging from a tree. Only my grandfather was the one hanging now. This troubled me deeply, and I woke up. As if things couldn't be worse, it was dark when I woke up. I don't even know how. My sleep felt like a power nap at most, nowhere near long enough to put daylight in the grave. I reached for my grandfather and found to my relief that he was still there, but he was asleep as well. Older folks easily drift off. I shook him awake and told him I needed to go home. I developed an overwhelming feeling of dread, but before I could convey that to him, he shushed me and said, "Be quiet." I asked why there was no sound in the forest anymore, which I had only just noticed, which was entirely odd on its own. After a very quiet moment, he agreed that we should return home, so we began the journey back, ending the hunting day early. Luckily, the return was uneventful until we came upon the remains. They appeared to be dog bones. There was even a skull, which was odd for me to see, because in the forest when we stumbled upon bones, the head was always gone for whatever reason. We continued cautiously past the discovery, and were basically in my backyard now, when a very distinct voice filled my ears from behind us. "Be quiet." I turned to the forest expecting to see my grandfather behind me, but instead, there was no one there. But it sounded exactly like him. In fact, it sounded exactly how he had said it. Not like someone else trying to mimic him, but like someone had just repeated it from a tape. I turned back around to see my grandfather further ahead. Scared, I ran to catch up to him. But then I heard it again, and nearly cried when I heard it. It repeated the exact same words from last time so perfectly, like a recording. So I just power walked to my home and pretended nothing happened, even when my grandfather asked why I had just stood there for a moment. The next day, our neighbors that live north beside the church graveyard called and asked if I had seen their dog Josie that had went missing. Not wanting to crush their hopes of finding it in a slow and drawn-out way, my grandfather informed them that we had seen bones the last night. This is important, because later that same day, they claimed their dog Josie had come back from the woods, but it was behaving extremely weird. And though it looked like Josie, they said it didn't act like Josie anymore. What did that even mean? That's all we ever heard of it, but it sounded more terrifying than anything yet. I'm pretty sure they never had the dog after the following of winter 2009. Fast forward 6 years, my sophomore year of high school. Me and a couple of buddies of mine had passed a college-level exam for an advanced placement class, so with it being halfway through our high school life and that success being announced, we invited some more friends to see who was interested in having a party at my place. Most of the party was uneventful, just my family cooking in front of a bonfire on the side of the house closer to the church and graveyard. It was boring until we decided to play manhunt. Sometimes I look back on the decision to do this and don't comprehend how stupid we really were. I guess I just pushed the past out of my knowledge, rolling it all out as my childhood exaggeration and distortion of fact. It is an important detail to add that one of my friends, the main two being the friends I'm referring to, was playing my Xbox earlier without my permission, and often treated my house like it was his own, putting his shoes up on furniture, etc. I wasn't happy about it, but I figured I'd get him back someday. Now on with the story. My friends, who I'll refer to as Ken and Paul for privacy reasons, were assembled with me and my cousins Nathan, Michael, and Gloriana in front of the bonfire. Before we ran across the property, I made it abundantly clear and painfully obvious I did not want anyone going in the woods. I voted myself to be it first, since I was hosting, and I got a flashlight. Forget how the round played out and what order I found people in, but for context I'll say Ken was hiding behind the chimney, Eric was inside eating leftover hamburgers, Gloriana had stayed cleverly next to the fire, blending in with the crowd that was observing our game. Nathan was in a tree, and my friend Jake, who apparently joined mid-match, was under my grandfather's truck. I'd found them all, and they joined me for my search. After scanning basically the whole property, it became more worrying for me that Paul had probably once again defied the rules of my house and went into the woods. Before we could line up at the tree line, Paul came to us with a worried look on his face. Of course he had went into the woods, but seeing his face, I was no longer mad. I was concerned what we were about to learn, judging by his petrified stance and his whiter-than-snow skin. After questioning him, he explained he had indeed hopped into the forest and recounted a totally different version of events than the other players knew to happen. You see, when we play, the people that are found stay with the hunter and assist his search, so it slowly builds up and goes by faster. Thus our accounts were all in a sequence. But according to Paul, we had come by him several times, walking in front of him. He said at one point, he threw a stick to draw our attention somewhere else, and instead of following it, the person who saw it looked right at him and stood next to him. It was at this point he explained to us he realized that this was not one of us. His best description of what it was detailed along the lines of an all-black person with an animalistic face like a coyote's. He claimed when he realized this, he hauled himself out of the brush and eventually ran into us after hearing no pursuit. When we heard his story, I told everyone to walk to the other side of the house where the fire was and stay there for the rest of the night, grill some marshmallows and all that to forget about what happened. Sometimes over Xbox, me, Ken, and Paul talk about this experience, but each time it becomes less serious to them. However, whenever we do have a meeting at my place from time to time, we still feel very on edge about something in that forest. From the research I've done, I'm almost positive that the dark entities in my forest are skinwalkers. To say the least, I don't venture out there anymore, and I keep my grandfather from doing the same. I hope anybody who has the experience for themselves has a great faith in God, because without religion, I don't know how you would protect yourself from things like that. That forest is pure evil, and I am happier every day knowing I don't have to go back out there again. But sometimes I still have the dreams, but I'm safe in my home. It's been consecrated. And while I'm safe, I want to tell as many people as possible to know that these monsters, or rather the paranormal, are all too real. Stay safe. Number 2. The Hunter Being Hunted, submitted by The Hunter 243475444. When I was 12, I got my hunting license for hunting deer, and I would go hunting with my brother as often as possible. Now, before this hunting season, a fire swept through the area, so everything was wide open and easy to see through. But let's just say this area had always creeped me out, even before the fire cleared it. I wasn't very sure if it all being open was a good thing. One day, my brother and I went out hunting, and we decided to split up. As I parted from his direction, I could have swore I saw him a few times. I saw quick shadows darting between the trees. I assumed it was just him in the distance, or him following a trail and doubling back a bit. The fire didn't strip the land of trees, only of the undergrowth really, but there is plenty of small canyons and valleys. As I approached a nearby creek, I continued to see a shadow between the trees, and I assumed that my brother was trying to sneak up on me. I acted like I didn't see him, and I made my way up a small ridge top. When I got up there, I suddenly heard my brother on the Motorola radio. He asked if I could hear him through it. I said yes, while listening to what sounded like footsteps behind me in the distance. As they drew closer, I jumped and turned around, expecting to catch him out in the open, but there was no one there. After an hour or so, I lost radio contact with my brother, but I did make one last attempt to tell him that I was heading home. I didn't want to be caught out here at night. When I walked through the door, my brother wasn't there, though he usually beat me home. My dad got a text from him not too long after I arrived, saying he was on his way. I went out to meet him where he was, and immediately I got chills. Where I met him, where he'd been hunting, it was well over 2 miles away from where I had been. I didn't mention the shadows and footsteps to anybody. I didn't even know if it was real what I saw or heard, because it didn't make sense. I just wasn't sure of anything. About a week later, we go hunting again. This time we didn't split up. Everything was dead silent, and for the first couple of hours, all we saw was a single doe, and that was it. After a lackluster day of hunting, I told him when we got back that I'd be going out again the next day. He wouldn't be in the mood, he said, so I'd be going alone. The next day, I left for the woods around 5 o'clock. I entered that valley area, and it was getting cold and windier by the second. After about a half hour, I began to hear the same footsteps I'd heard before. They were maybe 100 yards back, but with the leaves on the ground, I could very clearly hear human-like footsteps. I kept on going, trying to keep my mind focused on the hunt. The last thing I wanted was another empty and fruitless day. When the footsteps in the distance stopped, the footsteps that had somehow been following me, the noise was immediately replaced with a strange tapping sound. Every time I tried to look through my scope at the area, the tapping came from a different direction. Even though I hadn't found my spot yet, I was considering loading my weapon, just in case I needed to be ready for anything. Maybe 20 or 30 yards away, birds rushed out of some bushes, and I jumped. Something had spooked them. Something incredibly close. I began hearing movement and the snapping of small branches and more footsteps. Right away, I decided to head back to the top of the valley. When I get to the top, I hear footsteps following me still, but I didn't look back. It seems now, every time I go into those woods, something follows me. Something keeps me too scared to try to hunt at all. Whatever it is, I don't think it wants me out there. Later on, I ended up talking to some people about my experience, but nobody had any similar stories or explanations. When I talked to my grandma about it, she said that the valley does not give her a good feeling though. So, I wonder, what is it that's in that valley that despises hunters? Number 3. Monster in Boggy Creek, submitted by Rosemorn1117. I'm from a small town in southwest Arkansas called Fook, a place that's famous for the Boggy Creek monster. It's said to be a sort of Sasquatch who in the 70s allegedly terrorized my hometown and the surrounding area, which spawned the documentary The Legend of Boggy Creek. I've sadly never seen this large ape-like wonder, but have seen first-hand evidence of it, and far worse monsters out in the swamps and hills, the land my family and I have hunted our entire lives. When you're out in the woods as often as I am, you're bound to see some very scary things. There are 1,000 stories I could tell here, but the one that bothers me the most, the reason I no longer feel safe in the backwoods of my own homeland, it all began one evening when I was 15. Where we live, despite what wildlife officials of any form will admit, there are numerous large and dangerous animals. A razorback boar can tear up a man's leg deep enough to cripple them, or even end them, if it can get you on the ground. Gators can grow to just about any length, and the only thing they fear is a bigger gator. And then there are panthers. We've heard and witnessed panthers taking a calf weighing well over double their size straight up a tree and gnawing at it for days. Panthers scream like a terrified woman and can move silently through the brush or outright overtake almost anything. Quite frankly, they unnerve me, but what I found on my own deer lease close to a decade ago has shaken me ever since. I never walked those woods without protection, and I never will. Now, I'm a big guy, maybe 200 pounds or more, and an easy 6'2". While hunting, I always carried a Winchester 7mm, a Taurus Judge, and kukri for brush or emergencies. Nothing, I believed, could stand back up from a straight round from my Winchester, but whatever the heck this thing was, it didn't even notice it. Anyway, I followed what I thought to be a hog trail up a hill near a distant stand we used during the second day of deer season. I'd never seen such an easy game trail in my life, and to be honest, I was relieved, as I only had about an hour of daylight left. And then I saw the splotches of red. Not much, but enough to know something was hurt. I could physically see the signs of the poor thing being goaded along with bits of tissue and sizable amounts of that red coating the ground every few feet. I hit the crest of a hill, and at the bottom I found what thought was going to be it. But there was a leg, mangled and red, lying there alone. From the amount of viscera around this area, I deduced that it was over right here, that it had been put out of its misery. Worse still, the mess was so fresh that there was still steam coming off of it. The hog's tracks showed less than 2 hours, and it had to be more than 100 pounds. I fired the Winchester in the air twice to signal for help, and then I began to search the area. Whatever did this, the poor hog had no chance of putting up a fight. The thing that had taken it didn't leave a single track of its own. I soon found a small red trail leading off from the area and left something personal there to clue the others. By this point, I had half an hour of daylight, so I used my kukri to mark a tree every few feet as I walked. Within 10 minutes, I found the rest of the boar, and it wasn't alone. There were dozens of other remains, ranging from deer, pigs, cattle, dogs, and even a panther. The panther's head was missing from the rest of it, and the remains and pieces of the remains were strewn about as if tossed all over the place, like some sickening display. Remembering it as I am now, I make the joke that it was a garden, a crimson fetid garden made in the deepest part of the woods, where no man would be foolish enough to wander. Suddenly, I heard a noise and snapped out of my horror-stricken state. I chambered around and caught a glimpse of it. It was thin, pale, grayish-white skin. Its eyes were black, and it had long claws that were still dripping with the hog's innards. It tucked behind a tree and appeared 10 feet closer without making a single sound. It was like it just materialized right there 20 feet in front of me. I didn't want to give it a chance to get close, so I fired and hit it in the chest. But either it went right through or it didn't hit at all, because there was no hole, no recoil from the thing, just the flash of the muzzle. It was only 20 feet. I knew I had hit it, so I tried again, and still nothing happened, except for the smile that grew on its face. I kid you not, it grinned at me. Its hollow eyes stared at me with a big razor-toothed smile, with a mouth bigger than a man's, at least twice as large, and then it began to move. I can still see the thing in my nightmares even now. So when I say even its movements were unnatural, I mean it. It shuffled, I think is the word, forward with a strange posture. I could see now, its arms were almost double the length of a man's, though its legs were more canine-like. It moved almost awkwardly, while walking on its feet and knuckles. I dropped the Winchester, and I reached for my revolver, but the creature was within arm's reach before I could even blink. I fell over, and I could feel urine soak my pants. I knew it. This was it, man. I was gonna be this demonic thing's art project. That's when I heard the shotgun from behind me to the right, from the trail that I had marked. My father, my uncle, and a close family friend had been nearby, wondering where I was when they heard the shots. They opened fire on this thing with 2 hunting rifles and a shotgun at point-blank range. It didn't show a single wound. It just turned to face them and then back to me, smiling. After that, it bolted away and vanished into the woods. My dad helped me up and looked at me dead in the eyes, saying something, but my mind couldn't process it. There was no going back to camp that night. I was in the pickup and on my way home inside of 2 hours. When we made it back to town, I was finally recovering from the shock. My dad and uncle set me down to talk once we got home, and I got cleaned up. These men were veterans, special forces, yet they looked so pale. My dad gave me a cup of coffee and said that none of the rest of the people I know on this planet need to know what is out there. He knew the game warden, and they would take care of things. As for what I saw, he only had this to say. Your great-grandpa knew the Indians that lived in these parts, and they used to warn us of evil spirits. Your grandpa won't hunt anymore because of something he saw as a young man. I've seen men die firsthand, and yet something I saw when I was just a boy wakes me up at night. All of us have seen things we can't explain. You got lucky. I got lucky, and didn't lose my son tonight. So you take as long as you need to talk about it, all right? The next day, 30 armed men, including a preacher, scoured those woods as my dad picked up our gear and told them where he had last seen it. Officials bought and closed off the land without saying a word to anyone as to why. It all disappeared. After a few months of therapy, I was doing pretty well. I only wonder what could have happened to me. That and when I'll stop dreaming of whatever it was. A popular internet phenomenon dubbed the closest thing I've ever seen to its description was the rake, or even a wendigo. But none of that matters. Now that I'm a father myself, neither my boys nor I go out into the woods alone, because I personally know somewhere out there that thing is waiting, and I'm gonna make sure my son isn't its next victim. Number 4. Hunting. Submitted by Ronald. I was only 13 when this story took place. I'm 16 now. This happened when me and my Uncle Frank thought we would do a late-night raccoon hunt. We loaded the dogs into the truck, as well as the .22s. We took a nice drive from his house to a disclosed hunting spot. We unloaded the dogs and watched them run into the forest to find the raccoons. Me and Frank loaded our .22s. We turned on our flashlights and headbands, then we walked into the forest and already felt a creepy vibe. At least I did. We began walking in the direction where we last saw the dogs running. I think we walked for at least an hour when we began to hear the dogs barking at something. We started walking in that direction. We were maybe 100 feet away from the dogs now and could barely see them with our flashlights. My uncle looked at me and said, "Turn the lights off." I replied, "Are you crazy? It's too dark out here." He told me to just do it, so I listened. As soon as I turned my light out, I felt that same creepy vibe that I felt when we walked into the forest. I was trying to walk behind my uncle because I couldn't barely see where I was going. I kept feeling like someone was watching me, and I was a little creeped out. I decided to stop and see if I could see who was possibly following us, but I could see no one. I whispered to my uncle, "Can I at least turn on one light?" I waited at least a minute to ask again, because he never answered. So I started to ask, "Do you even know where we're going?" Then we heard a noise coming from behind us, and in front of us, all around us. I just stood there and stopped. I tried to do something, but no matter where I tried to go, the sounds were coming from that direction. Something was cutting me off. As soon as I felt there was no hope, my uncle came running at me saying, "Ron, what's going on?" As soon as I heard his voice, I felt like I just woke up from a dream. He said to me, "I didn't see the dogs, but I did see something tracking them. I'd never seen anything like that. We need to get out of here." He picked me up and started running towards the truck. I still felt so out of it. It was at that moment that I finally seemed to come to. But I also saw something that was following us. "What is that?" I screamed, yelling and almost crying. As soon as we made it back to the truck and out of those woods, everything felt right again. I saw the dogs cowering in fear and whimpering. My uncle opened the door only long enough for them to get inside. Then we started the truck and floored it out of there. I had nightmares about this experience for weeks, and we never went back to that part of the woods. Even my uncle knew that it was no longer safe there. And number 5, Mississippi Wampus Cat, submitted by JT. This story comes out of northern Mississippi, where the Tennessee and Mississippi line meets. I'm 14 and I've been hunting all my life, but this experience has put me well over the edge. It was last December around the end of the month. The day started out with waking up around 6 in the morning. I wanted to get out there to the deer stand as early as possible to have a good start. I packed up my Browning 243 lever action and I headed out on my ATV. When I entered the pine thicket, which leads into the woods, something felt off. I had this feeling where something bad was about to happen, but I ignored it, which no one should ever do. When I got to the stand, the feeling I had earlier had only gotten stronger. About an hour in, there were no deer to be found. 30 minutes passed, and I heard something coming towards the stand. I waited for it to come out of the brush, so I could see it clearly. When I did, without a doubt what I saw was no deer. What I saw was not normal. It was about the size of a cheetah. It looked to be a cross between a badger, a wildcat, and something that sort of resembled a lobo wolf. It must have been attracted to the call I used for deer. What came to mind was the Wampus cat. I've heard stories from my granddad about the Wampus cat, and I'm pretty sure that's what I was looking at. The beast walked toward the stand, and I was freaking petrified. I couldn't move. Even if I tried, I was frozen. Something was telling me to fire at it. Now I'm young, but I'm not stupid. There was no way I was going to risk not taking that thing down with the lack of firepower I had. I'm pretty positive that it hadn't seen me yet. About 15 minutes later into looking at this thing, still frozen, it must have lost interest in the call that it had heard. In an instant, the creature turned tail and ran back into the woods. I kept waiting though. Another 15 minutes passed and I made sure the creature was absolutely gone. Then I gathered up my courage and I slowly climbed out of the stand, then booked it back to my ATV. When it started, I turned around and at the corner of my eye, I could see its black velvet fur in the distance. Without hesitation, I booked it out of those woods full throttle until I saw my grandparents' house. When I ran inside, my grandpa immediately asked me, "Are you okay, JT? You seem spooked." "Yes, sir, I'm fine," I replied. I unloaded my gear and ran up into my room, and I just cried. My grandpa came to check on me and again asked if I was all right. I finally broke down and told him my experience, and he believed me. I haven't gone back in those woods since. I know it's hard to live without the taste of deer meat. Believe me, I miss having deer jerky. Jack Link's ain't got nothing on that. But sometimes it's just not worth it. You might be packing a bit of firepower when you head into the woods for a hunt. But what you don't have is the element of surprise. At least not for the things that are hunting you. Our human minds seem to forget that we are still part of the food chain, even when we're tightly locked inside our houses. All it takes is one shattered window, and your life could be in jeopardy. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send me your true scary stories from Chick-fil-A at darknessprevails.org/submit. And I'm gonna cut this one short, guys, because the tornado sirens are going and I'd rather not die right now. Hopefully you'll see this video uploaded today. Anyway, stay safe out there and stay creepy. Here's to hoping I don't get sucked into the sky